I'm actually really excited about this because it bodes really well for the search for life on exoplanets. It is basically a dry run, a test run of the entire intellectual machinery which we're going to look for life on exoplanets. So as a reminder for your listeners, exoplanets are planets orbiting other stars. Missions in the last decade have revealed Earth-sized planets, or potentially maybe habitable Earth planets around these around these stars to be relatively common. And it's a major goal of NASA and the ESA and other institutions to search them for signs of life. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to look for something weird in their atmosphere, something we don't expect to be there. And then we're going to try to figure out ways to make it abiotically. And then if we don't find a way to make it abiotically, then we're going to say, well, maybe there's something alive there.
Right.
And Venus, this is exactly what the process that we've started with this Phosphine on Venus thing. We found something weird there. And now we're going to try our darndest to A, prove that it's not there, and B, figure out if it is there, some way to make it abiotically.
Right.
And if that holds up, if that all holds up, and we decide that, we've really ruled out everything else we can think of, we think that the most conservative answer might be life. In the case of Venus, we can actually go look.
That's amazing.
You can do that for exoplanets, but you can go and check. And so you can validate this entire intellectual machinery that we're building up.
That's incredible.
That's so cool.
Did you at any point think that was ever going to be possible within our own solar system to be able to validate our machinery like this? Or were we always assumed to be kind of stabbing in the dark a little bit because whatever we discover on exoplanets, we can only really try to rule out here. We can't really ever validate.
That's exactly correct. Yeah, you've hit the nail. You and your colleague have hit the nail on the head of kind of the big criticism of life search on exoplanets, which is that we're going to have so little information. We're not going to we're only going to get 1 pixel worth of data. We're not going to be able to resolve the planet. We'll just have 1 core spectrum, maybe some time variable data if we're lucky. From that data, how can we really make a strong inference regarding the presence of life? And what we concluded is that it was always going to be probabilistic. It was always going to be like, 80% chance it's life, 20% chance this is a super, super, super weird planet. And one of the approaches, there people have been trying to think of creative ways of getting around this. One idea had been, well, maybe we're going to survey 100 potentially habitable planets and 50 of them are going to display the same type of potential biosignature. And we'll be able to say that it's super unlikely that 50 planets are all super weird. So the balance of probability is that at least some of them are alive. So in a sense, the idea that maybe we can exercise this machinery right here in the solar system is really exciting.
Wow. That is so cool to hear.
That is really awesome. So how do you think this is changing the direction of your research and or the direction of the research around Venus moving forward?
That's a really great question. In a sense, this isn't changing our work very much because this is kind of where we were going originally. We were very interested in anoxic systems, and we were interested in kind of walking the path less traveled in a sense. We were trying to different groups have different paradigms about how they approach things. Some groups have the approach that we have one example of a living planet, so we really need to focus on that and kind of extrapolate from that. Other groups have the approach of reasoning from saying, look, everything has to obey certain fundamental chemical laws. Let's be independent of Earth and try to trace that. So there's different approaches there. And so this kind of aligns with our approach, which is more of the avoiding terracentricity approach a little bit. So
wow. If I may just try to rephrase that. So basically, rather than just looking for the type of life that we know exists here on Earth, you want to be able to look for any type of life that could exist, even if it exists in ways that we can't fathom here on Earth. And this is a method of doing the latter. Is that? Yeah.
I wouldn't say completely independent. We want to be somewhat connected because, again, if you're allowed 2 degrees, you're allowed 1 degree of crazy.
Right.
You either claim life that's totally different from what you have on Earth, or you can claim a remote detection of life, but you can't do both. Okay. So, for example, phosphine we're focused on because it is produced by some life here on Earth.
Okay.
If there was a gas that we argued, well, maybe life could produce this metabolically, but it wasn't produced by something here on Earth, we wouldn't even propose that as an option then, because we don't have that proof positive that life generates it.
Right.
Gotcha.
But we are saying be less terracentric. Don't lose the Earth entirely.
Okay.
But step back a little bit.
Okay.
We know that X gas is made on Earth in trace amounts. Maybe on some other planet it can be made in slightly higher amounts.
Interesting. Because the way that you've described the kind of the environment on Venus, and if this is some microscopic life form on Venus, it's something that's very different than what we know here because we don't really know many life forms here on Earth that could survive in those conditions. Do you think that indicates that it's likely that this is in a an independent generation of life that is not from the same life that founded life here on Earth?
That's another really great question. So let's assume that, so if we make the assumption that there's a biosphere there, I would not at all be confident that it's a separate instantiation of life. In fact, I would not be at all surprised if it were very deeply related to ours. And the fundamental reason for that is twofold. One is the idea that Venus and Earth are not only quite similar and quite close to each other. It's projected that Venus could have been habitable as recently as 700 or 800 million years ago. That sounds like a long time, but the planets of the solar system are 4.5 billion years old.
Right.
So Venus could have been habitable almost as long as Earth was.
Right.
And if that were the case, another thing that we know is that all the rocky planets in our solar system should be exchanging material with each other. We found meteorites from Mars here on Earth. We expect meteorites from Earth to have gone to Mars. And we expect the same to have been true with Venus, between Venus and Earth as well. There have been some calculations done about that, particularly before it went into its runaway greenhouse and while it had a habitable surface and a less thick atmosphere. Mm-hmm. And there's been some really great work showing that it's not completely implausible that life could survive between the two. And you might have had I think hundreds of thousands to millions of tons of materials transferred between these objects over the history of the solar system.
I love the name for this. Do you know what it is?
I don't think I do.
Panspermia. Did I get that right?
I would be more specific and say lithopanspermia.
That's a new one for me. What does lithopanspermia mean?
Panspermia is the idea that life is transferred from world to world and diffuses throughout the universe. It could be exogenous. Mm-hmm. Lithopanspermia is a specification of that idea. It's specifically saying maybe life travels from one planet to another in rocks. That's the litho part of that.
Got you.
And it's based on the specific observation that Martian meteorites exist and their interiors never go through don't necessarily go through sterilizing conditions. For example, they don't really exceed temperatures like above 40, 50 Celsius or so. So if you have a bacterial spore, it could possibly survive.
Right. That's so interesting.
It's based on this very physical observation.
What would it take to verify whether or not this form of life is independent from the life that arose here on Earth?
Several things. First off, if you can detect it, and unfortunately, you can't do it remotely. You would need to, you need to culture this putative life and understand it a little bit better. So let's suppose it uses a different biochemistry than us. So it doesn't use DNA and RNA. It uses some other classes of molecules entirely. That would be a pretty good guess, although not a guarantee, that it's unrelated. If it uses a different structural molecule, so instead of carbon, it uses silicon or something like that, I would feel very confident saying that's totally unrelated. If it uses a different solvent, if it doesn't use water, it uses something else instead, like sulfuric acid. That's also a good guess that it's unrelated. Or if on the other extreme, if it actually does use DNA and RNA and stuff, and you can do a phylogenetic study on it, I don't even know if you can do that. Actually, let's disfavor that. I don't know if you can do that, so I won't consider it.
So in all of these examples, though, do you need an actual sample return mission in order to do it?
Most likely, yes.
Okay.
You would want a sample return mission of some kind, I would guess. I guess if people are doing really great things with miniaturization these days, so if you can somehow miniaturize and automate a wet lab and send it to Venus, it may be able to do stuff, but at least with the technology as it exists currently, I think you would want to plan for sample return,
right?
Which would be really hard. So don't hold your breath on that one.
But it sounds like this is all stuff that's going to be at least doable within our lifetimes, if not within the next decade.
Yes, but let's not get ahead of ourselves.
Right.
We could find other measurements which show that phosphine is not there.
Right.
In which case, Venus is still cool, but we shouldn't focus on phosphine as much. We could figure out some kind of abiotic synthesis mechanism. Mm-hmm. My personal bias, I like to go for the lab work first. Yes. I like to start from here on Earth. So that's where I would start first.